The Legends of King Arthur. Lancelot. Illustrated by Mike Phillips. Chapter 1. Lancelot reined his horse to a stop as he reached the edge of the woods. Camelot appeared gracefully in the distance. Beside Lancelot, his best friend Gawain's horse stamped at the cold ground impatiently. "What's the matter?" Gawain asked. "Nothing." "Then why have you stopped?" Gawain pointed to a third horse. The stag they had hunted lay draped across its back. "We must get this back for the feast. Go on ahead," Lancelot said. "I will follow." Frowning, Gawain asked, "Is something wrong? You've been quiet lately?" "I'm fine." "If you're sure." Gawain didn't believe him, but knew that Lancelot would say no more. He continued on to Camelot, leading the other horse behind him. Lancelot sighed. Gawain was right. He hadn't been himself lately, and there was only one reason for it: Guinevere. Lancelot knew his feelings were wrong. They were a betrayal of his king, a man who had quickly become his friend. But from the moment he had arrived in Camelot, Lancelot had loved its queen. Over the past 4 years, his love for her had only grown stronger. With no word from Tristan this past year, he hadn't even had their jousting competitions to distract him. Looking at Camelot now, Lancelot did not really want to return. It was a place he had come to call home, yet being there caused him increasing pain. Reminding himself that the pain of leaving would be even greater, Lancelot gently nudged his horse. As they continued their slow approach, he thought about what had first brought him to Arthur's court. As a child, Lancelot had sat at his father's feet, listening to his stories of war and the many battles he had fought. Lancelot had decided then that when he was old enough, he would fight alongside his father. But fate had stepped in. Lancelot had been only 6 summers old when he saw his father killed by his enemy, King Claudas. One of his earliest memories was of his mother hiding him in a secret chamber. He had watched through a spy hole as she pleaded for her life. Then she, too, had been killed. Terrified, Lancelot had run from his father's castle that night. He had only stopped when a mysterious woman stepped into his path. The Lady of the Lake had saved Lancelot, offering him safety in the magical land of Avalon. It was there he had learned the skills needed to become the greatest knight the world had ever known. When Lancelot had turned 18, the Lady of the Lake had taken him to Camelot. There he was given a place at King Arthur's round table. Later, Lancelot had been introduced to Queen Guinevere, and had fallen deeply in love with her. But it was no good. Guinevere only had eyes for her husband. That was how it should be, but knowing that didn't make it any less painful for him. Now Lancelot looked for any excuse to get away from Camelot, if only for a few hours. He knew he should leave for good. He needed to put as much distance between himself and the woman he loved so that he may, in time, forget her. But he couldn't. Chapter 2. The following day, Lancelot rode out with his friend Sir Lionel. Sir Lionel was looking for adventure as much as Lancelot was looking for distraction. All day they rode through the borderlands of Wales, only stopping when they were too tired to ride farther. "We can make camp there," said Sir Lionel, pointing towards a tree not far away. Lancelot agreed, fighting back a yawn. "We've got food, too," he declared, once he had reached the tree and plucked an apple from the lowest branch. He took a bite and enjoyed its sharp tang. After tying up their horses, Lionel took first watch. It wasn't long before Lancelot fell asleep. As the night went on, Lionel began to fight the need to sleep as well. He tried not to, but eventually his head began to droop, and his eyes drifted shut. Lionel was ripped from sleep by a strange sound, a cry of pain in the distance. He moved to wake Lancelot but changed his mind. If Lancelot came with him, Lancelot would deal with the source of the sound. Then Lionel's own chance of adventure would be gone. No, Lionel decided, he would deal with this himself. Lionel untied his horse and led him to the edge of the clearing before mounting. As he rode away, he strained his ears to hear more. Eventually, he did. It was the sound of horses' hooves pounding the ground. And it was getting closer. Suddenly, 3 horses burst out of the trees and onto the path ahead of him. Each horse carried 2 passengers, a rider, and a prisoner draped face down across its withers. As one of the men begged for his release, a 4th rider appeared on the path, dressed head to toe in black armor. He laughed cruelly at the prisoners. You have learned this lesson the hard way. No one is stronger than Turkin. I am the greatest knight of the borderlands. Spurring his horse into action, Lionel overtook the 4 horses and blocked their path. Stop! Lionel cried. The black-armored knight Turkin reined his horse to a stop. And who are you to make such a command? He asked. I am Sir Lionel of the Round Table. Lionel declared. I demand you release these men. Turkin laughed. Oh, you do you? Well, Sir Lionel, I will release them. He drew his sword. But only if you defeat me. Drawing his own sword, Lionel brought it down hard and fast towards Turkin. The next thing he knew, he was on the ground, and Turkin was kicking his sword out of reach. Tearing Lionel's helmet from his head, Turkin stood over him, blade leveled at his throat. Do you surrender, Knight of the Round Table? Lionel glared. He had not expected to fall so quickly, nor so easily. He had not expected to fall at all. With no other option, Lionel nodded his surrender. Turkin smiled, stepping back to drag Lionel to his feet. Seizing the chance, Lionel made a grab for Turkin's sword. But again, somehow, he was too slow. Turkin's fist was almost a blur as he pulled it back and landed a heavy blow to the side of Lionel's head. Lionel fell back to the ground, even more dazed than before. He tried to push himself to his feet but gave up as the world began to spin. Eventually, everything went black. Lionel opened his eyes and groaned. His head felt like it had been split in 2. When he tried to move, he found that his hands and feet were tied. It's no use, said a familiar voice nearby. Lionel struggled into a sitting position. Gareth? You've been gone from Camelot so long we thought you must have found a wife. Gareth chuckled bitterly. Alas, no. I've been a prisoner here I've lost count of the days. And we're not alone. There are others in other cells, ordinary men as well as knights. Who? I heard Kay and Geraint shouting, although they've given up now they know there's no one listening. Hearing the hopelessness in his friend's voice,